Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpwood Queen, and I'm here at my little cabin in the woods called Murphy's Law here in East Texas. And tonight we have a very special guest in
Phyllis Diller.
Montana. And on my left over here, I guess it would be on your left, on my, yeah.
There we go.
This is
Yes.
Richard Fifield, who I call King Richard, because the first time I met him in person. Our theme for our annual book club convention was Once Upon a Time, and it was fairy tale. And he came as King Richard and the crown and the whole regalia. It was fabulous. We had the most wonderful time, and we've been friends ever since. What year was that? Do you remember, Richard?
2015 or 2016.
Yep,
No, 2016, January.
in Nacogdoches, Texas. And
Mhm.
so last year, of course, we did it online, which was a huge success. And of course, this year we're going to be doing it online again. It's going to be a week long. It's going to be huge. But right now, we're going to be talking to Richard about his books, about fashion, about his wonderful blog. You've already got two up, and they're just fabulous. And
And I give such good advice. So if you are having any problems in your life, talk to me. I will tell you the tea. And
let's
usually it ends with leave him. He's not good enough for you.
well, tell us a little bit about where you are and what you have on.
Oh, okay. So not metaphorically, just geographically, I am in a town called East Missoula, which is next to Missoula, like a mile and a half away, but still has it's it's like a small town in Montana next to a town of 70,000. So it's the best of both worlds. I live in a place just like where I grew up, 1,000 people, but I can drive 5 minutes and go see a play, a concert, art, whatever. And as the world has changed, so has my little town because people can't afford to live anywhere anymore. So they are moving to the outskirts. So we have kind of created an artsy community out here because the artists can't afford to live in Missoula anymore.
Probably like what's
And
happening.
geographically, I'm in the northwest part, about 2 hours from Canada and 3 hours from Idaho.
What's the
It's a big
weather?
state.
What's the weather like up here? Because it's been so hot and humid, it's been miserable.
Well, I mean, normally June is a great month in Montana because it just rains. But this is the third day of 90-degree heat. But
Oh,
caveat, we do not have humidity and it cools off at night.
okay.
So when I lived on the East Coast, a 90-degree day it felt like a 175-degree day. And that's the difference in heat is, without humidity, 90 degrees isn't that bad. I mean, it sucks. I don't go out into the sun, but I mean, it's more like desert than it is moist.
High desert. High desert. Because you're
Yeah, and we, are kind of in the snow belt, so we don't really have a spring or a fall. We have we call it road construction season or get your truck stuck in season. So 6 months of summer and 6 months of winter. That's what we got.
oh my goodness. Well, I
Yeah.
know your first book that we picked was The Flood Girls. And that
And you asked me to have visual aids ready,
yeah,
and whatever Kathy says, I
yeah.
do.
And you had actually optioned that for television. Was that or at one point, is that on hiatus right now or
No, I mean, I don't know how familiar your audience is with how Hollywood works, but I mean,
yeah.
it is a bigger crapshoot than publishing, because every year it comes back up for option, and they can either renew their option or another production company will pick it up. And right now it's 6 years later, and it's with it's very strange. The women who produced Top Chef, which is so, well, my ex-boyfriend, I'll show another visual aid.
The sun's coming in on me.
So my ex-boyfriend has come in second place on Top Chef 4 times.
Oh my gosh. You're so funny.
Now he's hosting the Portland one. And every time I hang out with him, I'm like, could you just be mean or something so you can win? Because he just gets second place every time. All Stars, his own season, because he's too sweet. It's disgusting.
Oh.
But anyway, so the Top Chef ladies know him. So it was really weird to talk to them and be like, we have the same friend in common.
Well, at one time you mentioned that Drew Barrymore was involved in the project, and
Yeah, and it's that's how these things work. I mean, you can think of so many books that you're like, why isn't that a movie? Like, for reals. And it's just because Hollywood is, I think it's a more impossible place to communicate than publishing, because at least in publishing, they have to tell you what's going on status wise.
right.
But in Hollywood, once they option your thing, they don't have to talk to you until
No,
it's time
and
to
they don't.
renew.
And
So
they
you
don't.
never know if they've written a spec script or what stage of development it's in or anything, because they don't have to tell you. And so yeah, it's I really the Small Crimes of Tiffany Templeton, that might be picked up I think maybe through Netflix, but again, that's through Penguin Random House, which is a different publisher, and they really don't tell me anything. So I don't know.
It's just it's the craziest world. I thought publishing was insane, but now after my foray into optioning my film to DreamWorks, and they had the
Uh-huh.
screenplay all done and everything, and then DreamWorks sold to Universal Canada. I
Yeah.
go, well, you know, you can take the script if you can find somebody who'll buy the script that we paid for, and that ended. So then they, we were out in California, and they said, well, let's take it, let's start over, and let's take your story to Netflix or Amazon or Apple. And I go, yay. And then COVID hit. So, it's just one of those things. So I just,
Yeah, and I think a lot of the thing, I mean, my conception until I went through it with both books and movies was the old Music Row in Nashville, which is you knock on every door and you sing, and if they like you, they'll offer you an album deal. If they don't, you go to the next door, right? But these things are also corporate, and also the writer is not really that important in the scheme of anything, other than content creation. And that's why, I mean, this is, if I had to promote anything, I'd promote a self-published book of other women's stories that I edited, because
it's
it
all
actually
good.
means,
Tell her.
no, so it's like 6 years ago, I was a social worker forever, like for 17 years. And then I sold my book and I quit my social work job because I was like, this is, it's making me age. I have to put on more moisturizer because it's so stressful. And so I started doing a lot of volunteer work. And one of the things I did was volunteer at the OSHA Lifelong Learning Institute, which is for non-traditional students of a certain age. So I think it's like 65 and up. And I taught a memoir class. And it just wasn't, there was like 35 people in the class and it was only 6 weeks. So it was kind of impossible to do well. But some of the women in the class were like, we want to keep doing this with you. So let's meet once a month in rotating living rooms. And that's how it started. All of my classes are a year long. We meet, like I have 5 classes right now where we meet weekly, and it's a year long. So you have the time to actually produce the material, and you get a year's worth of feedback, which if you've ever done workshops in the university or any, it's just, you don't get a lot of feedback that can help you, because it's really hard to teach somebody who's never written before, like how to find the voice that works for them. So if they have a year, sometimes by April they're like, aha, this is my voice. And you have the time and the space to ultimately write a whole memoir if you want to. I've had 5 students so far sell their entire books, and that's a pretty good track record.
Really?
I've had over 120 women and 19 men over the last 6 years. And 2 years ago, let's see, I had I had signed a contract for The Small Crimes of Tiffany Templeton, and it was a contract book, which I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Yeah,
but it basically, they tell you what book they want you to write, and you write it in a short amount of time, and they tell you the plot, and you do it, and then you're done. But they sent me the plot and asked for a sample. I was like, I don't want to read that. That's just another ripoff of Cyrano de Bergerac. I'm like, when I look at YA and bookstores, what's missing are stories about girls who get in trouble, and small towns, and living in red states, and learning how to navigate a world that you're stuck in because you're a kid, but you might not believe in ideologically. Or in Tiffany's case, she was a bad girl. And I believe in writing what you want to read. And the biggest thing for me that I hate in fiction is the idea that a woman who does something bad has to atone, and basically has to go into the center of the town and let people throw rocks at her. And that's not okay. Because guess what? Straight men, when they do something wrong, people forget about it within 15 minutes. But for a teen girl, they internalize it and it becomes their identity, and it can change the rest of their life. Exactly. And I wanted to write about a girl who small crime, shoplifting, but in a small town, that's how they defined her. And it's a story of her learning how to realize that she's the only one that can define herself, and that shame it's not real, because everybody is imperfect. What matters is, how do you fix things? Because if a reputation follows you around, that's not your problem. And the more high you hold your head and the tougher you are, people will stop thinking about the past. And so I got this contract and I was like, no, this is the book that I want to write. I don't want to write about prep school kids on the East Coast who are rich and the heavy set girl writes the love notes for the cheerleader to the football player who falls in love with her, but then finds out that it's the heavy set girl that wrote the notes. I'm like, that's been done 195 times. I don't want to do that. I'll keep the names that you sent me, but this is the book that I want to write, is what rural America is really like and what it's really like to live at the poverty line. Because if that's all you don't realize you're living at the poverty line, especially in rural America. And at the time and now it's so divisive of us versus them. And that's not true. It's, there's as much nuance in a small town in Montana as there is in a big city. So I wanted to show that as well. So anyways, I warned Kathy, this is what happened. I signed this contract. It was due in September. I signed the contract in June, and it was a contract book, and it was young adult, which I was like, oh no. But it was a gig, so I took it. It didn't pay very well. It had bad, everything. It just wasn't a good deal, but at least it made me write something. But so my mother encouraged me to sign, and I signed, and a week later, she she had lymphocytic leukemia for 15 years, which is a really long time. I don't know if you're familiar with. It's a kind of leukemia that you live with, and if you're younger, it affects you more, but if you're older, but anyways, the chemo and the treatments finally stopped working. And I had done the work through Alcoholics Anonymous early on when she was diagnosed. So when I went to see her in the hospital, I didn't have the childhood resentment stuff, all the baggage that we carry with us. I did the work, and I was able to see her as a person who did the best she could with what she had. That's all. And the next 14 years, she became my best friend. I mean, literally my best friend. And she always says she wanted to have she's from the South, or she was from the South. She wanted to have a debutante for a daughter. I was the closest that she got because my two sisters were track stars. And I like gardening and cooking and cleaning. So she was that phone call every day where you're like, I want to paint my cupboards this color. What do you think? Everything, And when the chemo stopped working, she said, I don't want you to miss your deadline. And I was like, Mom, like, really? They didn't pay me very much. I don't care. They'll understand. And she was like, no. And I wrote this entire book in 3 months. I always took the 11 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning shift in the hospital because I could write, and my family didn't think she needed. And I was like, no, if she wakes up in the middle of the night, somebody needs to be there. And so for a summer, I wrote that in a hospital on a laptop, and it became a story about grief, which I didn't intend. And the night she passed away, I was in the middle of a chapter, and I was the one that was with her. And I think it was supposed to be that way because we didn't have any unsaid things. My sisters and my stepdad hadn't done that kind of work with her in for me, it was an act of grace to be there and to literally hold her hand and let her know that she wasn't alone. And of course it was traumatic, you know. If you've ever been with somebody when they pass, it's something else. But I left the hospital at like 5 a.m, and you know, I'd grown up without a father, and I was driving to my hometown to tell my stepdad, you know, she's gone. And the realization came to me, oh, I guess I'm an adult now, which is so weird as a 42-year-old person to be all of a sudden, oh, I guess, you know, now I don't have parents, so that makes me the adult. And you know, they didn't do a memorial. They just very dysfunctional. I hope they're not gonna watch this on YouTube, but I don't really care. I had to go be with the people that understood me and could lift me up, and that was here. I could do nothing there because they their way of grieving was not, there was nothing I could do except wash dishes, right? So I came back and I really threw myself into getting women's stories out. Uh, I talk a lot to high schoolers, which is funny. I don't usually wear this at high schools, but because of, you know, Tiffany being a 15-year-old, during the pandemic, I did a lot of Zooms with high schools because they were so desperate for material. And you know, growing up where I did, it was a town of 950 people. It was the 70s, and then the 80s, and we didn't have cable and we didn't have pop culture. And I knew when I saw General Hospital and Rick Springfield that I was gay. I was like, I think I'm gay. And I don't know how I even knew that, because that there was no context for it, you know? And then I also knew it was wrong. And I think it was because I picked up on the slurs people would use. And also at the time, all we had on TV was Richard Simmons. I mean, that was the gay, you know, the public face of gay people was Richard Simmons. And he was a clown. And when I would find books that did have homosexual characters in them, they were always murderers or murdered or nefarious. And if I had been able to check out one book from the library that had a gay person in it that was happy and healthy and normal, it would have changed my entire life. But instead, I stayed there until I graduated from high school and got out the second I could, because I didn't have that story and it wasn't safe, you know? And my mom, similarly, you know, she's from a long line of alcoholics and Swedish farmers and Dust Bowl farmers and tough customers. And she married 5 times, but 2 of them died, so it wasn't her fault, including my dad. But the ones that she did stick around were abusive alcoholics. And when you grow up with that, that was my environment. So she would, something tragic would happen and she would remarry, but she would pick another abusive alcoholic. And it's like, what is, bad boys are not that great. Like, come on, let's marry somebody with money. You could be ugly, it's fine, like whatever. But she just kept marrying the same type of man because she didn't feel that she was worth being loved well and respected. And she also didn't know that she had the power to leave and stand up for herself, and that other women were going through the same thing because she didn't have that story. And so that's, this became my passion project. You know, I have had so many students over the years write, will tell the truths about their lives for the very first time in a workshop in front of strangers, like say the things they've never spoken out loud in 50 years, their deepest, darkest shame, and you see it leave their body. Like it's the most amazing thing to witness when somebody finally tells their truth. It just lifts off of them and they just become almost different people. And it's an honor to be able to facilitate that. And you know, I was like, it's a shame that other women in Montana don't have access to these stories because they're real first person memoirs of women from Montana that cover everything from faith to um, there's comedy, there's love, but there's also sexual abuse and spousal abuse and drug addiction. And one of the most harrowing ones is this woman who was in jail. She was in prison for 20 years and her daughter died of a heroin overdose. She was the one who taught her daughter how to do heroin, and she couldn't go to her daughter's funeral. And but those stories have worth and they have value because somebody might not feel seen until they see somebody else has gone through it, and then they don't feel alone. So I was like, well, you know, we have all these great stories, and there's a lot of great charities in Montana that work with women's advocacy groups and bringing arts to small towns. I want to put together a compilation of short essays and have the proceeds go to Humanities Montana and the Zootown Arts Community Center, who bring arts programs into underserved areas. And so I, you know, told my students, I was like, you got a deadline. If you want to be in this book, you got to make it real good. So get your shit together. And oops, can I swear? Sorry. So I actually took the book to two publishers who both wanted to buy it. And I was kind of not expecting that. I wanted more just like advice. And they both wanted to buy it. And when I saw the terms, I was like, no way. I'm not, no, these, I want to make sure $1 from every sale goes to Humanities Montana and $1 from every sale goes to the Zootown Arts Community Center. Because if I sign your contract, they'll be waiting for royalty checks for the rest of their lives, and they might get one for 56 cents.
Yeah.
So I decided to self-publish it, and I did. I paid for it, had it published through a, you know, traditional press, but that way I was able to make sure the money from the sales went to the charities. But the best part was we did 31 tour dates across Montana with 5 to 6 of the women at libraries and churches and fairs. And at every single one, and Montana is a big ass state. Like it takes a long time to get, but at every one of the places that we did a reading, we called that town's services for women, um, to see if they could be present, because a lot of the stories are so intense that they might trigger you. And the last thing we wanted to do was traumatize somebody and then drive out of town. So we wanted to make sure that they knew afterwards, this person, you could talk to them. If you know somebody who's going through it, they know your town how to get help. And it was the most emotional, revolutionary, old school throwback thing that reminded me of why we write and the importance of storytelling, and how the fact I don't like the publisher or what they're doing or any of that, it does not matter. In the end, what matters is the women who came to these events and left feeling better about their lives, left feeling hope. I would much rather have that legacy than books that people liked. You know, that'd be great, but that direct contact, and all I did was edit it and put it together, but that direct experience was a reminder of the old days with the troubadours who would go town to town and tell stories and get paid with food so they could go on to the next town. And yeah, I mean, it's something I'm so passionate about. And then of course we had 24 more dates. Like we were going 3 states away sometimes. Like that's how popular it was. But we had like this huge event at Barnes and Noble, which is bizarre. Like the corporate office called and wanted to do an event. And even though it's not a traditional publisher, but they were so into the cause, we had all these huge things planned, and then the pandemic. So when you have a lot of authors who are in their late 70s, you know, after a year of, you know, not being on the road, and they're kind of like, you know, I was good enough. Let's let the younger ones do it. So we had to stop, and it's okay. We won't, you know, tour anymore. But if you ever have I think I have 4 boxes left, which is amazing because we were the #1 bestseller in Missoula for 2020, or no, 2019. And that's like over James Lee Burke, who is from Montana. We were the #1 seller in Missoula, which is crazy for a self-published book. And the first run was 1,500 copies, and I sold them all in 4 months. Like we published in September, and by the end of the year, we were the #1 bestseller for the entire year. But then the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, I have 4 boxes of books. You guys don't want to tour. I don't want 260 copies of this book. So if you all know any organizations that work with women or storytelling or anything like that, I took the website down and all of that stuff because I was still paying for it out of my pocket. So you can't order the book anymore. Just let me know. It's like if they'll pay for shipping, I'll just send them, because it's the kind of book that I just give out all the time, with the caveat being, here's a free book, but I want you to give it to a woman in your life that needs it when you're done. And that was a really long, I don't know what time is it. I'm so sorry.
No.
I'm so used to being the only speaker. Anyways, So that's this, and I designed this and made this costume myself. It's on her right now.
State
But
the title, Richard. State the title. It's on our reading
it's
list.
well, the sad thing is the title is it's We Leave the Flowers Where They Are, and that's because the oldest woman in our class was 97, and she had been married to the poet laureate of Montana, and nobody had any idea that she was helping him write his poems and writing poems on her own. And then he died. And then she's just like on fire and publishes her first book of poetry. But then she passed away the next year.
Oh,
But her poem, I'd like to read it to you if it's okay.
I want to hear it.
So I got to write the blurb for her book. And one of her poems just was like, I was like, Mary Laura, I want that to be the title. Because she had advanced Alzheimer's, and getting her to write a memoir it was just not gonna happen. But I wanted her to be part of this book, and it's called Familiar Flowers of North America, and her name is Mary Laura Wilson. In dark winter, a sun-blazed snapshot of two woods roses pitched me onto a noon-hot trail, its shroud of fevered bloom and rot, the scorching scent of tightly woven forest life, the rose's scarlet petals and inflamed yellow stamens. Woods roses are the untamed ancestors of costly wedding bouquets and funeral sprays. You could say they're vain, the way they thrust themselves at the camera. When I was 5, I feared nothing in the forest. Never too hot for me or cold. My eyes were for every flower and for every bud. I cruised those wild paths on hands and knees, hidden in plain sight, like I spy. Our family rule was this: we leave the flowers where they are. It was okay to collect little tokens, cones, bones, feathers, berries, a rock shaped like a bird, or a loaf of bread, or a wizard's hat. But the glint of mica lured me most. I thought its glitter could be God. It's just like, and everything in that book, or everything in that poem is what this book is about. How if you leave flowers alone, like, in the forest that grow on their own, they'll propagate, they'll bloom again. If you rip them up by the roots and you cut them, and if you just leave them alone and appreciate them for what they are and let them continue their life cycle, they'll be there the next year. But if you don't, and you're greedy and you want that flower, it's a metaphor for life. It's like we have to let women find roots, grow roots, and leave them the hell alone to become beautiful. And that poem, it was a no-brainer to have that be the first thing in the book.
Great.
And yeah, so she blessed us.
That's amazing. What's it?
This is like the saddest YouTube ever, you guys. I'm sorry.
No. What's the title of her poetry book?
It's called Summer Lightning, and her name's Mary Laura Wilson.
Okay.
And she was married to a man named Ed Leahy, who's canonized. If you're a poet, you read him in your classes. He was our poet laureate for many years, and he was an abusive alcoholic and couldn't meet deadlines. And so she would secretly finish his poems. And finally, in her 90s, somebody was like, wait a minute, this is you. And she was like, yeah. And it was an effort upon a lot of people like me who, tried to help. And they worked with her. She was in very advanced stage of Alzheimer's at the time. They went through boxes and boxes and boxes until they had 75 poems that she gave her blessing to. And oh my God. And I'm sure you've experienced Alzheimer's in your life. There's good days and bad days. And the day her book came out, her first published book at age 98, it was a big event. And I was like, please be a good day for her. Please be a good day. We could not get that bitch off the stage. She was like on it and eating it up and just more, bravo, bravo. And she was fully aware and she got to just soak it all in. And she was a ham and it was great. And, you know, that's, to me, that's so much bigger than this or any of the other stuff.
And tell me her name again. Her full name is
Mary Lore Wilson.
Mary
Lore is all one word, Maryllor.
And Ed Leahy was her husband?
Uh-huh.
You know what it reminds
me of? I just talked some serious trash, so let's hope the wrong people don't watch this.
Well, it reminds me of the story. I don't know if I never knew the story, but I remember the famous paintings. They were in the dime store in my hometown of the little girls with big eyes.
Yeah, Keen.
Yes. Keen. And then I saw the movie about the woman who created that look, and her husband took credit for all of her work. All of her work. It was and I think that happened through the centuries in art and writing a lot.
There are a lot of authors that are canonized whose wives actually did the heavy lifting because they worked as their secretaries, but they were smart. And so while they were typing, they'd be like, you know, I don't really like that line. I'm going to change it. Throughout the 50s and 60s, like many women were responsible for great works of literature that men took credit for. Right. So that's why I think that men should not be allowed to write books. And if they do write books, it should only be books that are sold in airports. Because I think that there is a genre of writing called airport fiction, which is a book that I don't want to read. Because it's about spies, or, you know, it's never a genre. I'm like, where's the Ann Tyler, or where's John Irving, or where's, you know?
And that's, I just saw your post for tomorrow, and I'm so excited because The World According to Garp is one of my favorite all-time books. And I loved everything by John Irving, but I'm so looking forward to sharing that tomorrow. But what is your favorite author or book?
Like, my favorite author is Truman Capote, but not because of what he wrote.
Interesting.
No, I mean, I have it right behind my computer is a framed picture of Truman Capote, and it's because of if the book I recommend to everybody, every book club I ever do when they ask me for a recommendation, Gerald Clark wrote a biography of Truman Capote that is the most delicious, dishy, trashy, fabulous thing in the world. And you will learn everything about New York society for 100 years. And you will learn everything about all of the women we've always loved, Jackie O, you know, but it was really interesting because he didn't have a story either. So what he did was he burned it down. Like, he got what he wanted, which was fame and fortune, but he still wasn't satisfied. And he single-handedly destroyed high society in New York City. Like, there used to be this thing called the social register, like, you know, the black and white ball that he did. Women killed, like, literally, there were 2 suicides of women who killed themselves because they didn't make the guest list. It was on the cover of Time magazine or Life magazine. And it was an exercise in power for a gay man to have that much power in 1962, where Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow have the front table next to Rudolf Nureyev, and, you know, his guest list was Katharine Graham. You know, it was meticulously planned. And he just, after that, he burned high society down by telling all of their secrets. And you have to wonder why. And I hate talking shit about other books, but I was really excited. There was a book that came out called The Swans of Fifth Avenue.
Yes. Read it.
And I really recommend Gerald Clark's biography of Truman Capote.
I will check it
Because it's
out.
just like, it shows you so much of how the writing life can destroy a person, and how if you're not writing for the right reasons, it shows. But the writer I love the most, it would be a tie between John Irving and Ann Tyler. They write the same books over and over and over again, but they're always great.
I haven't ever read any Ann Tyler, but I've read everything of John Irving.
You've never read The Accidental Tourist?
Nope.
Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant?
No, never read any Ann Tyler. I have this weird thing that if a book, an author becomes overly popular, I don't want to read it, because I want to read, I want to discover authors.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I understand.
Authors that are, and so I've only got so much time to read. So I try to pick books that are, I think if To Kill a Mockingbird or In Cold Blood was written today, In Cold Blood would probably get published, but To Kill a Mockingbird today would probably not get published because it's politically incorrect. It would be racist. It would be told from a white woman's story. And
great. And so Flannery O'Connor would be like my number 3 favorite writer.
Love her.
And she is so dark, but yet her stories are about God and faith and these amazing divine spiritual things, but wrapped up in the most dark humor ever. And Ann Tyler has this gift of
one. I'll have to read it.
There's that sweet spot of sad, it's like laughing through tears. That's my favorite emotion in the world. If you can get somebody to laugh in a really sad part in a book,
Pat Conner.
That's the best thing ever. Like, that's what I strive for in all of my books. And her books are sustained pieces of that, just feeling of how it feels to be alive.
I will check it
out. It's hard to explain, but she's amazing.
I will definitely check it out. But I'm always interested in what authors read, because I think it tells you more about them than anything. That's why the first thing I do when I go to somebody's house is I look at their libraries. People go, "Do you look in their medicine cabinet?" I go, I don't. But I have a hilarious story. I was in a book person's home, and they had just moved into this house, and they had a new library, and I went in. I was just floor to ceiling books. I was so impressed. And then I stood there, and as I'm looking at it, I see Tom Clancy's The Hunt for Red October here, and I see Tom Clancy's Hunt for Red October down over here. I saw like 5 copies of They,
An interior decorator created a bookcase for that person.
yes, and there were repeats of books. It wasn't like me. You can go over to
No, no.
right now, and you
The
can
sad
see
part is
there's 4 copies of Pat Conroy's one of his books, but
well,
they're all
during the
signed.
pandemic, that was actually a side gig that people had, was staging rooms behind people to look like they were smart. So they would say, put this here and put these books here. And Halston, I'm sure you're familiar with, he put his books in the wrong way. They were all shelved like this
That's stupid.
because he didn't like the different colors. And you're like, oh my God.
For a book, for me, when I want to get my hands, now I don't have a normal way of putting books in, but I have all my Pat Conroys together and I have multiple copies of some of them because they're all signed and they make great gifts. So, it's not like I'm trying to fill shelves. It's just that he's my favorite author.
And he's also one of those writers like John Irving or Ann Tyler that straddles the line between commercial fiction and literary fiction. And Pat Conroy can also do that thing where it's real life and warts and all, and you laugh and you cry, and it's not saccharine and it's not, I was gonna say pulpy, but I didn't get the pulp.
And when he speaks,
but when I write, like I don't read anything but trash. I can't. When I'm writing,
like what? Oh, I probably shouldn't ask you what's trash.
No, I don't mean I read a lot of celebrity biographies. I read a lot of, huh?
I do too. I just read Tippi Hedren.
But I made the mistake once while I was writing a book to read the Poisonwood Bible, and I gave up. I was like, I can't write as good as her. I'm not gonna finish this book.
Oh,
so I only read things that are true stories about people that I can't, that don't affect my writing.
Well, that makes sense, but as long as you're reading. I mean, I had an author one time tell me that he didn't have time to read anybody else's books because he only read his own. And I go, well, then how can you become a good writer? Because I when you hear how people phrase and the words, I mean,
I don't even read my own books. Like people at book things will be like, do you remember that part? And I'm like, no. And they're like, in your book, this, and I'm like, it did? Like, I don't even read my own books or retain them.
All the time. Remember what I put in there because I'm working on my next book and I go, did I cover this before? I've got so many stories, but I think the things that you're telling us, Richard, are very important because I think people need to understand that we don't take ourselves very seriously. I mean, I've got a hat with a rose on it. I mean, but when it comes to the reading of books, sharing the
it's damn serious.
I am very serious. So I get really upset when people go, the first time we were on Good Morning America, the other book club, when I made the announcements, Charlie, he said, Gibson he said, well, what do you think of Kathy's selection? It wasn't this book, it was The Dive from Clausen's Pier by Ann Pecker. What this New Jersey book club was called Mostly We Eat Book Club. But anyway, he said, what do you think of her choice of The Dive from Clausen's Pier? And I can still hear this woman's voice saying to all the millions of viewers, well, I don't know. What could she know about reading? She's a Southern hairdresser. And I'm trying to keep myself, and I have to give Charlie Gibson and Diane Sawyer kudos.
Oh, Kathy, how I wish you turned it into a Maury Povich moment and thrown a chair across the stage and then said, bless your heart.
Anything, but I didn't have to because Charlie went ballistic. He goes, are you kidding me? He goes, I did not know the book that Kathy was going to pick, but I've read that book and it's probably one of the most profound. one of the most perfect books for book clubs selection because there's so much to discuss. Because it's about a young
yeah.
couple who've dated all through junior high, high school, and college, and they're graduated. They've gone to Clausen's Pier to celebrate their graduation, and he dives into the
Oh, I
water.
know. Don't spoil the book, Kathy.
What's the first
I
page?
love that book.
He he broke his neck.
I know.
And so then the dilemma is, what do you do when, and she was thinking about leaving him. So
To me, I always say when people, and we'll wrap it up with this maybe, like I do not ever cast judgment on any genre of book. If people are reading the back of cereal boxes, that makes me happy.
me too.
Just read whatever, because it is a passion that fills your soul more than anything else in the world, and hopefully expands the way you think.
Absolutely.
Maybe the back of a cereal box, not so much, but don't judge what anybody else reads.
No.
Ever.
No. And to have that happen, but I'll tell you, every woman in the South that saw that show called me. I got like 1,000 calls.
I'm sure.
And they were like, "How dare they say?" And I said, I became a hairdresser to put myself through college. I always wanted to be an artist. It wasn't. I didn't have any desire to be a hairdresser, but hairdresser has served me well because I have graduated and I run the largest book club in the world. So that was a stereotype call, and it really infuriated me. And I'm thankful to say I have two really great chapters of the Pulpit Queens in New Jersey who are big supporters of me. So
Did you know that Cammie Wynette renewed her beauty license every single year until the day she died, just in case? Like, even at the height of her fame, she got her beauty license renewed every single year.
I do too, and I don't know why.
I love that.
The shop I worked in closed because of COVID, and it's sad. But my dad always said, learn a skill with your hands, and that way you'll never be out of work.
Yes. And right, does rhinestoning count though? Because I can rhinestone, I can hand sew. Yeah. I hope those skills count. Typing, that's your hands.
Yes. And Lainey's working in the shop, and that's she puts together the costumes for the big shows. Yeah. She's doing Anna Karenina right now, and I think Beauty and the Beast. But she puts together all the costumes for these gigantic shows in that area, and she sews and she does. That's why you guys hit it off.
Well, if anybody, if they see this and want to see what I'm writing right now, I'm on Instagram at the Lady Baltimore, where I am writing a soap opera that goes every single day and is about a woman who lives in a mansion who is a dilettante, and it's pictures of clothes and pictures of women of all shapes and sizes and ages and races wearing clothes, but with a soap opera. It's always fun. So that's where my creativity is right now, if anyone wants to check it out.
Book Splendora?
Huh?
Splendora? What? Have you read that book?
What? I don't know.
No, you don't know it? I'll have to send you the information. You need to read this book. It's about a new librarian comes to town and has inherited this house, and she gets the job as the librarian. And it is the most fabulous book. It was written by the secretary for Ronnie Claire Edwards, who starred on The Waltons. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I do. John Boy.
Anyway, he wrote this book, and it's a little sleeper book set in Texas about a real little town. And I think you would love that book. But I'm going to post this on, we recorded this, so I'm going to post this on the Kathy L. Murphy channel, and I'm going to go to Lady Baltimore on Instagram to see what you're writing now. So
yes, because it's trashy soap operas and empowerment stories for women.
I cannot hardly wait.
And fashion. Yes. Thank you so much for having me and
Sure.
sticking it out.
Thank you,
Sorry I
everybody, for
talked so much.
joining us. And we'll see your blog tomorrow on Breathless Bubbles and Book. And it's got The World According to Garp, which is just
The best.
fabulous. So thank you guys for joining me.
Stephanie, it's good to see you again.
Love you.
Bonjour, no principessa.
Bye, King Richard. All hail
Arrivederci.
King Richard. Bye-bye.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Bye,
Have a
Richard.
good night, you guys.